In the north of England, nestled among the quiet green hills of Northumberland, lies the small market town of Hexham. In the years after the war, life there was steady, familiar, a place where each face was known and every door could be trusted. Among those who called it home were John and Florence Pollock, a young couple raising two lively daughters, Joanna, 11 years old, and little Jacqueline, 6. The Pollocks were ordinary people by every measure, yet their story would one day challenge everything the world believed about life and death. For now, it began in sunlight, with laughter, lessons, and the echo of skipping feet along cobblestone streets. Joanna was the older sister, thoughtful and kind, always looking out for Jacqueline, who followed her everywhere. They shared their toys, their secrets, and their games of make-believe. To their parents, the girls were the heart of the house, inseparable, untiring, full of the easy joy that comes only to children who have never known fear. But Hexham, like all quiet towns, was not safe from fate. On a spring morning in May 1957, tragedy came without warning. The two girls, walking hand in hand to church, were struck by a passing car. In the space of a heartbeat, they were gone. The world stopped for John and Florence. Their laughter was gone from the house. Their beds stood empty, and even the sunlight seemed cruel. What remained was silence, and a father's impossible hope that somehow, some way, this was not the end. John Pollock was a man of deep faith, stubborn faith, some said. In the days after the accident, he spoke words that startled his wife. "They will come back to us," he whispered, certain as prayer. Florence, broken by grief, begged him not to speak of such things, but he would not bend. He told her that souls could return, that life was not a single thread, but a circle. He dreamed of his daughters at night, not lost, but waiting. He saw them near a bright light, laughing, calling to him. Florence dismissed it as grief's illusion, a father's desperate mind refusing to accept what the earth had taken. Months passed, the seasons changed, yet the ache remained. The children's toys stayed where they were, untouched on the shelf. Florence tried to move forward, but John kept his quiet vigil, certain that a promise had been made. Then, nearly a year after the accident, Florence discovered she was expecting again. The news filled her with both hope and dread. Doctors told her it was likely one child, perhaps two. John said only, "It will be them." Florence feared what grief might make of faith, but part of her, the part that still heard laughter in the empty hall, wondered if such things were truly impossible. On the morning of October the 4th, 1958, Florence gave birth to twin girls, Jillian and Jennifer. They were healthy, identical in face and form, but not entirely the same. Jennifer bore a small mark on her forehead, a thin, pale line in the exact place where little Jacqueline once carried a scar. And on her leg, just above the knee, another mark appeared, round, brown, and identical to one Jacqueline had since birth. John saw the marks and wept. "You see," he said to the doctor, "they've come back." Florence told him not to speak such things aloud, but the thought would not leave her. When she held the twins, she felt both awe and unease. Something about them seemed older than new life should be. As the months passed, the girls grew strong, content, and curious. The family moved from Hexham to a new house nearby, trying to begin again. Yet the past, it seemed, had followed them. When the twins began to walk, they sometimes called out names their parents had not spoken in months. Joanna, Jackie. Florence froze each time she heard it, but John only smiled, certain that his prayers had been answered. Whether by faith or fate, the circle was turning again. The first sign came on a quiet afternoon when Florence opened an old trunk. Inside lay the saved toys of Joanna and Jacqueline. A small tea set, a doll with a faded ribbon, a red wooden pushcart. She had meant to tuck them away again, but the twins toddled over and reached inside as if greeting old friends. Jillian picked up the doll and said very softly, "This is mine." Jennifer took the cart and whispered, "This is Jackie's." Florence stared. The names had not been spoken in that room. The twins were barely speaking at all, yet their hands went unerringly to the right things, the favorite things. John watched without surprise. He named each toy aloud, and the girls nodded, smiling as if they had found something they had misplaced. Florence wanted to say, coincidence, mimicry, anything ordinary, but the moment felt older than chance. It felt like recognition. In the evenings, the twins toddled through the house as if the walls remembered them. Jillian gravitated to the window seat Joanna had loved. Jennifer curled in the corner where Jacqueline used to read. No one had shown them these spots. Their feet simply found them. One morning, Jennifer tripped and fell. She touched her forehead and said, "I heard it, where I heard it before." Florence felt her breath catch. On that same place, a faint line waited, the old scar reborn as a birthmark. Florence told herself there must be an explanation, but explanations, she found, did not quiet the heart. When the twins were a little older, the family returned to Hexham to visit relatives. They drove slowly along familiar streets. The girls pressed their faces to the glass, staring with the kind of awe children reserve for places they love. Yet they had never been there. As the car passed the old school, Jillian said, "Our school, our playground." Jennifer pointed toward a narrow lane. "Short way home," she announced. John exchanged a look with Florence and turned down the lane. It led, as it always had, to the Pollocks' former house. They parked outside. Before anyone could speak, the twins hurried up the path and went straight to the back door. "Kitchen," Jennifer said, touching the handle. "Cupboard with the sweets," Jillian whispered, pointing to a corner Florence had not yet mentioned. A neighbor stepped out to greet them, an older woman with kind eyes who had known Joanna and Jacqueline well. The twins paused, then smiled the shy, familiar smile the lost girls had always given her. "Hello, Mrs. Brown," Jillian said, though no one had spoken the name. Inside, they wandered the rooms with quiet certainty, naming spaces as if memory unfolded under their feet. They asked after a park with a stone lion, the one Joanna had loved to climb. They asked after a chipped blue cup that had belonged to Jacqueline. Each detail landed true. Florence listened, her hands trembling, and felt her unbelief begin to loosen, not in surrender, but in wonder. Back at home, the echoes grew clearer. Jillian took charge in games. shepherding her sister with the gentle authority Joanna had once shown. Jennifer clung to Jillian's sleeve, laughing easily, quick to cry when startled, the same tender spirit that had lived in Jacqueline. At bath time, Jennifer shielded a faint mark above her knee, refusing to let water splash there. "It is my sore place," she said, though nothing ached. When Florence asked how she knew, Jennifer answered, "Because it was sore before." The girls spoke of people they had never met, school friends by name, a teacher with a green scarf, a man at the corner shop who gave out peppermints on Fridays. When Florence checked with neighbors, the names matched the past like keys fitting old locks. One afternoon, a lorry rumbled past the house. The twins froze. Jennifer threw her arms around Jillian and cried, "The car is coming." They shook until the sound faded. No one had told them how their sisters had died. No one had spoken of roads or wheels or the moment in May. That night, John sat beside Florence in the dim kitchen light. He did not say, "I told you." He only took her hand. She did not say, "I believe." She only did not let go. Between them lay a question as wide as the world, and two sleeping children who might carry the answer. In the morning, the twins asked to play with the old doll in the red wooden cart. They used the names again, soft and certain. Joanna, Jackie, as if calling themselves home. As the twins grew, so did the strange familiarity between their lives and the ones lost before them. They would often finish each other's sentences, drift into conversations about things no one had taught them, as if two small ghosts whispered softly behind their words. Florence began to write everything down in a notebook. Dates, phrases, places. At first she hoped to find patterns that would explain it, but what she found instead was repetition. Scenes lived twice. When Jillian learned to draw, her pictures mirrored those Joanna had made. The same garden, the same animals, even the same house with the same crooked chimney. Jennifer preferred to stay close to her mother, just as Jacqueline had. She hummed the same nursery song her sister once sang at bedtime, though no one had played it since the accident. Florence's pen trembled as she wrote each detail, afraid to read it back aloud. John, meanwhile, took quiet joy in every strange coincidence. He said that love could cross any boundary, even death, that the twins were proof that the soul keeps its promises. Florence wanted to agree, but every miracle carried a shadow. She feared that if this was true, it also meant the girls carried memories of dying. At night, she sometimes heard them talking in their sleep, giggling softly, whispering each other's names. And once, just once, she heard a third name, hers. By the time the twins turned 3, they could tell their parents where toys had been kept in the old house, what patterns the wallpaper had, and which room had the squeaky floorboard. None of this they could have known. John asked them gentle questions, but never led them. Their answers came easily, like reciting lines already written in memory. One evening, Florence found them playing under the table with crayons. On the paper were 4 stick figures, 2 big, 2 small, all holding hands. Jillian pointed to the drawing and said, "That's you and Daddy. That's us, before." The parents stared, unable to speak. The twins only smiled, proud of their picture, unaware of the chill that ran through the room. In town, neighbors began to whisper. Some said the Pollocks had encouraged the fantasy, that grief had clouded their reason. Others said the twins had been touched, chosen somehow. Florence tried to keep the girls away from such talk, but Hexham was small. The story traveled faster than truth could follow. At church, the vicar spoke gently to John after service. He told him that souls do not return, that his daughters were with God, and that to speak otherwise was to invite darkness into the home. John listened, but said nothing. He had already seen too much to unsee. Faith, grief, and mystery now shared one roof. When winter came, the twins began to ask questions, small ones at first, then stranger. "Why do we have to grow up again?" Jennifer asked one night. "We already did." Florence answered softly, "Everyone grows up, darling." "But we did," Jillian said, "before the car." Florence felt her voice fail her. She changed the subject, but the girls were already drifting to sleep, their words floating in the dark like snow. The next morning, as Florence dressed them for church, Jennifer said, "You made me wear this coat before." Florence frowned. The coat was new, bought only weeks earlier, yet Jennifer pointed to the buttons and said, "They are the same, but you changed the pockets." The details were too precise to ignore. Florence began to wonder if memory was more than thought, if it could live inside the body itself, waiting to be remembered. Outside, Hexham remained unchanged. Life went on. Shops opened, bells rang, people greeted one another as they always had. Yet in one small house, a mother and father sat watching their daughters play, listening to laughter that seemed to come not just from the present, but from the past as well. It was as though time had folded and love had slipped through the seam. When the twins were old enough to attend nursery, Florence worried about how they would adjust. She feared the other children might find them strange. But on the first morning, something unexpected happened. As they reached the school gates, both girls stopped and looked up. "We've been here before," Jillian said softly. They walked straight to the playground without hesitation, to a patch of worn earth under a chestnut tree. Jennifer bent down, picked up a small stone, and whispered, "We buried our toys here." The teacher, puzzled, asked if they had visited before. Florence shook her head. It was the same school Joanna and Jacqueline had attended, the same tree they had once played beneath. Inside, the twins seemed to know the rooms, even which cupboard held the paints. The teacher later told Florence that when she asked their names, they answered Joanna and Jackie, without hesitation, then giggled, as though correcting a small mistake. By the end of that week, the headmistress called Florence aside. She spoke kindly but carefully. She said the girls had remarkable memories, yet sometimes seemed to confuse dreams with reality. Florence smiled politely, though her hands trembled. What could she say? That they might be remembering lives already lived? That night John read the girls a story. As he turned out the light, Jennifer murmured, "I like being back." Florence did not sleep. In town, word of the Pollock Twins spread beyond whispers. Some neighbors came to see for themselves. Others crossed the street to avoid them. A local newspaper printed a small column calling it "The Reincarnation in Hexham," a story that brought both fascination and discomfort. Teachers noticed that Jillian's handwriting looked almost identical to Joanna's. Even her phrasing, her favorite words, matched those found in old schoolwork still kept in a drawer. Jennifer's speech mirrored Jacqueline's. Her small stammer, the way she tilted her head when listening, the same nervous habit of twisting a strand of hair around her finger. It might have been imitation if anyone had shown them the originals, but no one had. Florence tried to protect them from attention, keeping visitors away, but curiosity always found a path. Clergymen came, asking quiet questions. One left a Bible on the table and said, "Pray for strength, but pray for truth as well." Scientists wrote letters requesting permission to study the girls. Florence refused them all. At night, John would stand by the twins' door, listening to their steady breathing, wondering if souls could share one heartbeat across two lives. And sometimes he thought he could hear a faint echo of laughter from years ago. The same sound, the same joy, returned. By the spring of 1962, the twins were nearly 4 years old. They had settled into ordinary routines, lessons, stories, and games. Yet the extraordinary lingered like the scent of rain long after the storm. One afternoon, Florence decided to take them to a park in a nearby village, a place they had never visited. As they entered the gate, both girls stopped short. "The swings are over there," Jillian said, pointing to the far side of the green. Florence looked, and there they were, just as she described. "And the slide," Jennifer added, "by the big tree." Florence's heart thudded. She had not mentioned this park before. Later that day, the girls ran toward a shop across the road. Jennifer tugged Florence's hand. "Sweets," she said. "He gives us chocolate." It was the same shop Joanna and Jacqueline had once loved. The same owner, now older, standing behind the counter with astonishment on his face. He gave them 2 small bars, free of charge. "You've been here before," he said softly. Jennifer nodded. "Yes, before the bang." Florence drove home in silence. That night she hid the car keys. The twins never asked to drive anywhere again. The circle, it seemed, was closing once more. The local church had been patient at first. John was known as a man of faith, perhaps too much faith. But when stories spread beyond Hexham, the vicar called one evening, his tone firm beneath the kindness. He warned that talk of returning souls was not Christian teaching, that the devil often worked through comfort to lead hearts astray. John listened in silence, the lamp throwing his face half in shadow. When the vicar finished, he said only, "I know my daughters when I see them." The words hung in the air like incense, heavy, unanswerable. Florence, torn between her husband's conviction and her own confusion, began to pray for clarity, but clarity never came, only more questions. One night, after putting the girls to bed, she found them whispering in the dark. "We remember the light," Jennifer said softly, "before we came again." Jillian nodded, eyes wide. "The bright light that sang." Florence's skin prickled. She wanted to tell them to stop, to forget such nonsense, but their voices were gentle, certain, unafraid. Later, when she asked what they meant, Jillian said, "It's where we waited for you." That night, Florence wept in the hallway, not out of fear, but awe. She realized she no longer knew which was more terrifying, that her husband might be right, or that he might not be. The twins continued to surprise them. They sometimes used words their sisters had used, phrases that had belonged to another time. When Florence scolded Jennifer for climbing onto a chair, the girl replied, "You said I could last time." At meals, they argued over who sat where, claiming old seats exactly as Joanna and Jacqueline had. When John showed them a family photograph, the girls pointed to the faces of their former selves and said, "That was us." One Sunday, as Florence brushed Jillian's hair, she noticed the girl gazing into the mirror with a strange stillness. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Jillian answered, "Sometimes I remember when my hair was longer, when I was bigger." Florence's brush froze mid-stroke. She looked into her daughter's reflection, a child's face, small and innocent, and saw in the eyes something ageless. That evening, she took the notebook from its hiding place and read her own entries from the first years. Every uncanny word, every impossible act. She realized she had documented not a haunting, but a return. She closed the book, set it aside, and whispered into the dark, "My girls, all of you are home." Spring returned to Hexham, soft and green. The twins played in the garden, their laughter echoing across the hedges. To any passerby, they were ordinary children, yet to their parents, they remained the bridge between worlds. John's faith grew stronger. He spoke to no one of proof, only of promise. "Love pack," he said, "does not end. It changes shape." Florence began to understand what he meant. She no longer searched for logic. She began to listen instead, to notice how the air seemed different when the twins sang together, how sunlight fell warm upon the window seat Joanna had loved. Still, the mystery pressed quietly at the edges of their peace. Sometimes, when Florence walked past the nursery, she caught fragments of conversation, the twins murmuring about people who no longer existed, places no longer there. Their words were soft, dreamlike, as if remembering a book read long ago. One morning, Jennifer asked, "Mummy, why did God make us come back?" Florence knelt beside her and said, "Maybe he didn't make you. Maybe you just wanted to." Jennifer thought for a moment, then smiled. "Yes, we wanted to see you again." And for the first time since that terrible spring morning, Florence truly smiled back. By the summer of 1963, the story of the Pollock twins had spread far beyond Hexham. Journalists began writing small features, each trying to decide if it was a miracle, a delusion, or something stranger. Letters arrived from across Britain, some offering sympathy, others quoting scripture, and a few claiming their own children had lived before. John answered none of them. He feared the noise of the world might disturb the quiet truth he had found. Florence, however, kept every letter in a small box. She said they reminded her that they were not alone in wondering where the soul begins and where it ends. Then came the letter that would change everything. It was from a man named Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, who had spent years studying children who claimed memories of past lives. He wished to visit Hexham and speak with the family. John was cautious. He did not want his daughters treated like experiments, but Stevenson's letter was respectful, written in calm, scholarly tones. He did not promise belief, only an open mind. When Florence read the final line, "Some truths demand to be recorded, whether we understand them or not," she felt a small shiver of recognition. 2 months later, the American arrived. Dr. Stevenson met the family on a mild September morning. He was courteous, soft-spoken, dressed more like a teacher than a scientist. The twins, now 5 years old, greeted him politely and soon forgot his presence, playing quietly with their dolls on the carpet. Stevenson watched them closely. He took notes as Florence recounted the early memories. The toys, the birthmarks, the recognition of places. John spoke with conviction, though without pride. He seemed less a man seeking proof than one guarding something sacred. The doctor asked to see the birthmarks, and Florence obliged. He examined them carefully, comparing photographs of Jacqueline's old scars. His face gave nothing away. Later, he asked the girls gentle questions about their toys, their home, and the people they once knew. The twins answered easily, sometimes contradicting each other in small details, but agreeing on the larger ones, enough to make silence fall heavy in the room. When the interview ended, Stevenson thanked them quietly. He said he had studied hundreds of such cases, but few so clear. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asked the twins what they wished to be when they grew up. Jillian said, "I want to be a teacher." Jennifer said, "I already was." The doctor wrote that line twice in his notes. Stevenson returned to America, but continued to correspond with the Pollocks for years. He later included their story in his book, Children Who Remember Previous Lives, describing it as one of the strongest Western examples of possible reincarnation. He pointed to the physical marks, the precise memories, and the emotional balance between the twins that seemed to echo the sisters before them. Yet even he could not claim to know why or how. Evidence, he wrote, is not the same as explanation. For the Pollocks, the attention brought both comfort and weariness. Friends grew distant, unsure what to believe. Some accused them of encouraging fantasy. Others came seeking miracles. Florence longed only for peace, for her daughters to grow up without the eyes of the world upon them. But late at night, when the girls slept and the house was still, she sometimes opened the old notebook and read the handwriting from those first years. Her own disbelief, the wonder she had tried to hide, reminded her of how thin the veil between lives might truly be. Outside, the moon shone on the quiet street, and she thought, perhaps memory is just another way the heart refuses to let go. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges of wonder. As the twins approached their 7th birthday, the strange memories that had once guided their games began to fade. The names of old friends slipped away. The places they once described so clearly became distant and uncertain, as though belonging to a dream half remembered. Florence noticed first. When she mentioned Joanna and Jacqueline, the girls looked puzzled. "Who are they?" Jillian asked. Florence smiled faintly, answering, "2 little girls we used to know." The twins nodded politely and went back to playing, their minds already elsewhere. John tried not to show his disappointment. He had long imagined the mystery would grow with them, perhaps offer new proof as they matured. But now it seemed to dissolve like mist at sunrise. He asked Dr. Stevenson about it in a letter. The reply came weeks later. It is common, as children grow, that such memories retreat. Perhaps they are not meant to stay. Florence felt both relief and loss. The miracle that had once frightened her was slipping away, leaving silence in its place. She wondered if faith required holding on to mystery, or learning to let it go. The girls laughed often. They played with new friends, read new books, and began to live entirely in the present. But sometimes, late at night, Florence would hear them talk in their sleep, a single name passing between them like a spark. As the twins entered school, they became like any other children, bright, talkative, full of curiosity. Teachers found them polite and creative, though slightly more serious than their classmates. Florence was grateful. She wanted them to have an ordinary life, free from the weight of questions that no one could answer. And yet, fragments of the past sometimes returned in unexpected ways. Once during an art lesson, Gillian painted a house none of them had ever seen. White walls, green shutters, a garden with roses, and a wooden gate. When Florence asked about it, Gillian said quietly, "It's where I used to live." The name of the village she gave was one they had never visited, but John remembered hearing Joanna mention it years before. Jennifer began to write stories about sisters separated by water who found each other again. "They always come back," she told her teacher. Florence said nothing to the school, afraid the whispers might return. Instead, she kept their drawings in a box beside her bed, treasures from a mystery she was no longer sure she wanted to solve. The girls were growing fast, and with each year, the light of memory dimmed a little more. When Gillian turned 12, something unexpected happened. She began to dream of places she could not name, a winding staircase, a window that looked over a river, a woman with auburn hair standing in a garden. The dreams were brief but vivid, leaving her breathless when she woke. She told Florence, who listened carefully, saying little, but one afternoon, when visiting relatives, they drove through a village near the coast. Gillian grew quiet, staring through the window. "I know this place," she whispered. They stopped the car. Gillian led her mother down a narrow street until they reached a house with white walls and green shutters, the same house from her painting years before. Florence stood still, her heart pounding. Gillian walked to the gate, her hand hovering above the latch. "I used to live here," she said softly, "with my other mummy." Florence wanted to deny it, but the certainty in her daughter's voice silenced her. They did not enter the garden. They only stood there for a moment, two lives folded over each other in the quiet of afternoon. Later, as they drove away, Florence looked back once. The house was ordinary, but it shimmered faintly in the heat, as if part of it still belonged to another world. The older the twins grew, the more the past withdrew. By their mid-teens, the strange recall that had once defined their childhoods had become little more than a family legend. They laughed when old friends brought it up, embarrassed by the fascination their story still inspired. "We don't remember any of that now," Gillian would say kindly, though a trace of wonder sometimes lingered in her smile. Florence and John grew older too, their once fevered debate settling into a quiet acceptance. John still believed. He said faith is not about proof. It is about what remains after doubt has spoken. Florence no longer argued. She found peace in not knowing. Visitors still came occasionally. Students, researchers, writers. Some asked to see the old toys, the photographs, the notebook of Florence's careful notes. Most left, thoughtful, silent, touched by something they could not quite name. The twins themselves began to forge new paths. Gillian loved books and wanted to teach. Jennifer took to drawing. filling sketchbooks with portraits of faces she claimed came to her in dreams, faces that seemed both familiar and lost. When Florence looked at those drawings, she often thought of Joanna and Jacqueline, and how love, once awakened, might find endless ways to draw itself again. One evening, as autumn settled over Hexham, Florence found the twins sitting together on the porch, watching the sky turn gold over the hills. They were 16 now, nearly grown, and speaking softly of the future. Florence listened from the doorway as Jillian said, "It feels like we've lived here forever." Jennifer nodded. "Maybe we have." They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that carries no fear. Florence stepped outside, the boards creaking under her feet. "You girls sound older than you are," she teased. Jennifer turned to her and said, "Maybe that's because we've been older before." The sun sank behind the fields, leaving the sky streaked with violet. For a moment, Florence saw them not as her daughters, but as something eternal, two souls walking the same circle, finding each other again and again, through light and loss and time. That night she wrote one last entry in her notebook. If this is reincarnation, then it is love that guides it. Nothing else could find its way back so perfectly. She closed the book and never opened it again. Years passed quietly. The twins finished school, left home, built lives of their own. They remained close, still finishing each other's sentences, still sharing dreams that echoed faintly of something beyond this life. When John grew ill, both girls returned to Hexham. They sat beside his bed, holding his hands as he smiled at them, eyes full of unshaken faith. "I told you," he whispered, "souls find their way." He passed peacefully that night, the lamp by his bed still burning. After the funeral, Florence found herself walking alone through the garden, past the same apple tree where her daughters had once played. She looked toward the house, imagining all the versions of her children who had lived within its walls. For a moment she thought she saw them, 4 instead of 2, laughing together before fading into the sunlight. She said aloud, "If you are all still here, thank you." And in the wind that rustled the leaves, there seemed to come an answer, gentle, certain, familiar. In later years, the twins rarely spoke of their childhood mystery, though they both admitted that parts of it stayed with them. Jillian once told a friend that she sometimes woke in the night certain she was meant to be somewhere else, a house that smelled of pine, a garden with white roses. Jennifer said that every birthday felt like 2 days pressed together, the celebration of this life and the faint echo of another. When journalists tried to reach them, they refused interviews. They said their story had already been told, and that truth should rest where it belongs. Yet privately, they remained curious about the strange beginning that had shaped them. Jillian kept one of Joanna's dolls in a small wooden box. Jennifer still traced the faint mark on her knee whenever she was lost in thought. Florence watched them grow into women of kindness and strength. She never tried to explain the past again. She simply believed that some mysteries belong to the heart alone. Sometimes, when all was quiet, she would open the window of the old house and listen. The wind through the trees sounded so much like laughter that it made her smile instead of weep. Decades later, long after the newspapers had forgotten, researchers still studied the Pollock case. Dr. Stevenson had passed on, but his students continued his work, Returning to Hexham to revisit the archives, they interviewed townsfolk, read old diaries, and listened to Florence's recordings made before her death. One researcher wrote that the Pollock story endured because it sat perfectly between faith and reason, too detailed to dismiss, too impossible to prove. It was, he said, a window through which the unknown leaned close enough to touch. Among his notes, he quoted something Gillian once said as an adult. "I don't remember being Joanna, but sometimes I dream her dreams." Jennifer, when asked later about reincarnation, answered more simply, "If I lived before, it was to find the same people again." The study ended where it began, with wonder. And somewhere in the quiet hills of Northumberland, the old stories still whisper on windy nights, carried by voices that refuse to fade. By the time Florence's house was sold, the garden had grown wild with ivy and roses. The new owners found a box in the attic, filled with photographs, toys, and letters tied neatly with a ribbon. Inside was the notebook, its final line written in fading ink. "There are two ways to believe, through proof or through love. I have chosen love." They left the box untouched, returning it to the attic where it belonged. But sometimes, when wind moved through the old window frames, they swore they could hear faint music, the sound of children playing in the garden below. The Pollock twins lived full lives. They married, had families, and grew old under the same sky, where their story began. The memories never returned, not fully, but the bond between them remained as strong as ever. The quiet recognition that they had walked this path together before. And perhaps that was all the proof the world would ever need. As the years passed, the world changed around them. The old roads through Hexham were widened, the shops replaced, the church rebuilt in stone that smelled too new. But the house where the twins had once lived still stood, small, quiet, weathered by time. Occasionally, visitors stopped to look at it, reading the names on a worn plaque near the gate. Most walked on, but a few lingered, sensing something they could not name. Gillian sometimes returned, standing at the fence, her hair now silver. She said the garden always felt familiar, not in memory, but in rhythm, as though her steps echoed others that had walked the same path long before. Jennifer visited less often. She found the air around the house too heavy, as if the past still breathed there. But when she dreamed, she always saw her sister beside her. Not Gillian, but Jacqueline, the younger one she had been before. The dreams brought comfort rather than fear. She said it was like remembering a song once learned, still waiting in the mind. They both agreed that even if the memories were gone, the connection had never broken. "We are not the proof of reincarnation," Gillian said once. "We are proof that love does not forget." When the story of the Pollock twins is told now, it is often softened, trimmed of its strangeness, polished into something neat. But the truth remains stubborn. 2 children died, and 2 others were born, who carried their marks, their fears, their laughter. Scientists still search for language to explain such things. Coincidence, shared genetics, unconscious memory. But perhaps some stories are not meant to be solved with instruments and numbers. Perhaps they are there to remind us that mystery still walks quietly among us. The villagers who remember those years still speak kindly of the family, They say the twins brought light back to the house that grief had darkened. They say John's faith was not foolish after all, that his daughters did return, just as he promised. And on calm evenings when the church bells ring across Hexham, it is said you can almost hear the echo of children's laughter between the notes, distant, familiar, eternal. Some mysteries belong not to the mind, but to the soul. Today, the case of the Pollock Twins remains one of the most compelling stories of its kind, studied, debated, and retold for more than half a century. Yet beneath all the analysis and argument lies something simpler, a love that refused to end. For John and Florence, the mystery was never about proof. It was about reunion. For the twins, it was never about who they had been, but about who they had become. In the end, perhaps reincarnation is not about returning to life, but about returning to love. Memory fades, faces change, but the bond that connects us, parent to child, soul to soul, continues beyond the reach of time. If you stand on the quiet streets of Hexham at dusk, when the lamps glow and the air turns still, you might feel it. A gentle warmth in the air, a whisper of two lives meeting again in the endless circle. And maybe, just maybe, the laughter you hear is not imagination, but memory finding its way home. Time moved gently onward, carrying the Pollock story into history. It appeared in journals, documentaries, late-night conversations, always the same puzzle with no missing piece to find. Some believed it a sign of reincarnation, others a trick of grief, and a few said it was something deeper still, a ripple of love across the surface of time. For those who had known the family, the memory lingered. They remembered John's quiet conviction, Florence's soft strength, and the way the twins, without meaning to, brought healing where despair once lived. The Pollocks never asked to be believed. They asked only to be remembered kindly. In the end, belief mattered less than wonder. The story became a mirror, each listener seeing in it what they most needed to find: proof, comfort, or the simple beauty of mystery itself. When the last of the family passed, their names joined the churchyard stones, resting side by side. But those who walk there say that the breeze through the grass sounds like laughter, carried far and faint, still together after all these years. The story lives because the question lives. What makes the Pollock twins different from so many tales is not their strangeness, but their tenderness. There is no fear here, only longing and love that refuse to die. It is a mystery that comforts instead of chills, a whisper that perhaps we are not as separate as we think. Dr. Stevenson once wrote that if even one case like the Pollocks proved true, then life itself would have to be rewritten. But perhaps it was never about proof. Perhaps it was about giving the heart permission to believe in something larger than the mind can measure. Florence would have agreed. She once said that miracles do not happen to show us power. They happen to show us connection. And so, through each retelling, the story changes shape, but never loses its glow. It is not about two children returning. It is about love returning, again and again, until we finally understand it. Perhaps that is all any of us are, echoes learning how to love more clearly each time we are called back. Even now, visitors to Hexham sometimes stop at the old cemetery, curious about the legend. They leave small flowers by the Pollock stone, or a child's toy, or a note that simply says, "I remember." The town itself has grown, but the fields still stretch beyond, green and endless. On quiet evenings, when the wind moves low through the hedges, it feels as if the past is not gone at all, only resting nearby, like footsteps waiting to be heard again. It is said that love cannot cross the veil between worlds, but if you listen to the laughter of children, if you feel the pull of familiar eyes, if a name ever rises to your lips for no reason you can explain, maybe that is proof enough that the veil was never really there. Somewhere, two souls still walk hand in hand through a Northumberland garden, free of time, free of fear, finding each other, always. The Pollock story remains a soft flame in the great library of mysteries, small, steady, and impossible to extinguish. Scholars may debate it forever, but those who listen closely hear something simpler beneath the questions, the heartbeat of faith, the echo of reunion, the certainty that love is not confined to a single lifetime. When people ask what became of the twins, there is no grand ending to tell. They lived, they loved, they carried on, just as we all do. But in the quiet corners of their lives, they carried something invisible, a sense of having walked this road before, and of walking it still. And that is the beauty of the mystery. It does not demand belief, it only invites it. Because maybe the greatest stories are not those that tell us what is true, but those that remind us what might be. The story of the Pollock twins is not an ending. It is a circle, turning still. It asks nothing more than this: to listen, to wonder, to imagine that the soul may travel farther than we dare believe. If you've listened this far, let the thought linger a little longer, that love remembers, even when memory fades, that somewhere beyond what we call life and death, those we've lost are already on their way back to us. This has been the Pollock Twins, England 1957, told by Sleepy Mysteries. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more true mysteries that will keep you thinking long after the last word fades. And why not enjoy a whole night of mysteries? Just click on the playlist. True Mysteries, the Unexplained Files. And I leave you with this thought. Perhaps what we call reincarnation is simply love, finding its way home again.
Listening to 思